"I'll be gentle and go slow," said the president to the virgin girl. That night, everything changed. She was crouching beside a child's art project, helping glue down strips of green paper grass, when she felt the weight of someone's gaze. It wasn't loud or invasive, but it stopped her hand midair. Clara Hayes looked up slowly, instinctively, like her body had recognized something before her mind could name it. Across the classroom stood a man in a charcoal coat, still as stone, watching her. He didn't belong there. Not in a public elementary school full of construction paper rainbows and spilled juice boxes. But there he was, expression unreadable, eyes dark and quietly consuming. Julian Mercer. She recognized the name before the face. Founder of Mercer Tech. Tech prodigy turned philanthropist. Mysterious, withdrawn, known for donating millions through untraceable foundations. He was rarely photographed, even more rarely seen in person. And yet now, he stood in her classroom like a ghost with perfect posture. She didn't move at first. Neither did he. The noise of the school faded behind the sound of her own breath. Then slowly he blinked, and it was like the moment had released them both. She stood up, brushing glitter off her skirt, her gaze still locked with his. There was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity, and something else she didn't dare name. He nodded once, subtle and slow, before turning away. But something had already shifted. Clara would later try to convince herself it had been nothing. A brief encounter, a misunderstanding. But the truth settled in her chest like dust on a forgotten shelf. He had seen her, and somehow she had seen him too. Clara didn't expect to see him again. The event had passed. The donation was made. She assumed Julian Mercer would vanish back into the shadows of his private empire, back to silent foundations and locked gates. But 3 days later, he returned. Not with cameras or assistants, but quietly, alone. She was reviewing homework in the staff lounge when the school secretary buzzed in. "There's a visitor asking for you," she said. "Name's Mercer." Clara froze. When she stepped into the hallway, he was there. Dressed down this time in a wool coat and dark jeans, but no less out of place. The children rushed past him in waves, laughing, loud, chaotic. He didn't flinch. He watched them like someone studying another species. "You came back," Clara said, trying to keep her tone even. "I did," Julian replied, his voice low, careful. "Why?" He paused then. "I wasn't sure, but I thought about you." She blinked. "You don't even know me." "Maybe, but sometimes knowing isn't the same as recognizing." She folded her arms. "Is this some kind of tech genius line you use when you visit public schools unannounced?" A beat. Then, a flicker of something close to amusement. "No," he said. "This is, different." Clara didn't smile. "This is a school, not a stage for some charitable photo op. The kids here, they aren't props." "I know. Do you?" His gaze didn't waver. "I came back because I wanted to understand why you looked at me the way you did. Like you saw something behind everything I built to stay hidden." Her breath hitched. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had dared. For a moment, silence passed between them, not cold, but charged. She lowered her arms, just slightly. "You're not like what I expected. Neither are you." It wasn't a truce. It wasn't trust. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, Clara would later learn, often arrive quietly, without ceremony, without certainty, and yet they shift the entire world. It began with a book. A week after their hallway conversation, Clara walked into the little used bookstore 2 blocks from her apartment, the one with crooked shelves and handwritten price tags. She came there often after long days seeking the comfort of forgotten pages and old wood. He was already there. Julian sat in the far corner, a hardcover resting on one knee, his coat folded beside him. He didn't notice her at first. His head was bent in focus, lips slightly parted like he was reading not for escape, but survival. Clara hesitated, just for a moment, then walked past him to the poetry section. When she glanced back, his eyes were on her. This time she smiled first. From then on, their meetings became rhythm rather than coincidence. A late-night diner on Hawthorne Street, a quiet bench by the riverside. Once they ended up walking the entire length of the city's East Bank Trail, neither speaking much, both content in the hush between them. Clara began to realize something rare about Julian. He didn't fill silence. He didn't rush it. In a world obsessed with constant noise, he gave space. And in that space, she found herself speaking more than she meant to. She told him about her little brother, how she used to pack his lunches alone after their mother left, about her fear of becoming invisible, of being someone who gave endlessly but was never truly seen. Julian listened without flinching. One night, in a shadowed corner booth, she asked, "What are you most afraid of?" He answered after a long pause, "That if someone truly knew me, they'd leave." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached across the table, fingers brushing his. "I'm still here," she whispered, and he looked at her like she had just rewritten the definition of mercy. They never named what was happening between them. There were no labels, no plans. Only moments, shared coffees, quiet walks, the kind of eye contact that felt like being undressed without shame. Something was building, not loud, not fast, but undeniably real. The invitation came without preface, a simple message handwritten on the back of a recycled note card. "If the weekend feels too heavy, come breathe where the river runs slower." Then an address. It was the kind of invitation you don't say yes to lightly, but Clara did, not because she was reckless, but because something in her chest ached to know the world he disappeared into when no one was watching. Julian's cabin stood at the edge of the Columbia River Gorge, not luxurious but thoughtful. A wraparound porch overlooked pine trees. Inside, books were stacked like furniture, and the fireplace still carried the scent of wood smoke. He met her at the door with sleeves rolled and uncertainty in his eyes. "You came," he said. "You asked," she answered. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. Instead, he led her inside where the silence was warm, not awkward. That night, they made no declarations, no grand gestures, just two people wrapped in quiet understanding. He made tea. She explored the bookshelf. They listened to an old record playing from a dusty speaker, a cello moaning in the background. Somewhere in the middle of the second cup, Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. Hours passed that way. Stillness between them, breath sinking. When the rain began to tap gently on the roof, she whispered, "Do you ever feel like you're not built for the life you've created?" Julian's voice was rough when he answered, "All the time." She turned to him then, not for comfort, but recognition. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers trailing down the side of her face like he was memorizing the shape of her bravery. When she left the next morning, the goodbye felt unfinished. Not like an ending, but like a pause. They hadn't said what it was, but somehow they both already knew. It didn't happen out of passion. It happened out of silence. Clara had returned to the cabin 1 week later, carrying a tote bag with books and fresh oranges. Julian had opened the door before she even knocked, as if he'd been waiting, and maybe he had. They didn't talk much that evening. She read aloud from a book of essays. He made soup and burned the garlic. They laughed softly. She rolled her eyes. He said nothing, only looked at her like the sound of her laughter might be the only honest thing in his life. After dinner, they sat on the floor instead of the couch. The fire was low, the record player whispered a forgotten tune. Their knees touched, then stayed there. Clara said, "This scares me." Julian turned his face toward her. "Why?" "Because it doesn't feel like something I can walk away from." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached for her hand, fingers tentative, slow, asking without words. She didn't pull away. When his thumb grazed her palm, something in her chest unspooled. She leaned in first. The kiss wasn't hungry. It was searching, quiet. The kind of kiss that asked, "Are you here? Are you real? Will you stay if I show you who I really am?" Julian kissed her like he was afraid she might vanish. Clara responded like she'd been holding her breath for years. They didn't rush. There were no urgent hands, no frenzied mouths. Only warmth, only reverence. He undressed her like someone learning how to pray. She touched his scars without asking their stories. And when they finally lay skin to skin, it wasn't about desire, it was about trust. Afterward, they didn't speak. She rested her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her like a promise unspoken. He whispered her name once, just once, as if saying it was enough to keep her tethered to this world. And in that cabin, with firelight flickering against the walls and snow falling quiet outside, Clara realized something. She had been found. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of being seen. Something shifted after that night. Not in the way he held her. He still reached for her in sleep. Not in the way he looked at her. If anything, his gaze had grown softer, more searching. But inside Clara, something had begun to stir. Something quiet. Something she didn't have words for yet. She returned to the city the next morning, carrying a sense of stillness that didn't match the traffic and honking horns around her. She taught her students multiplication. She packed lunch for herself. She smiled at the crossing guard. But inside her body, a subtle drum had begun to beat. She was late, not drastically, just enough for her to notice, just enough to count the days and feel her breath catch. At first, she told herself it was stress. Long hours, disrupted sleep. But her body felt different. Her sense of smell was sharper, her chest tighter. One morning, she reached for coffee and nearly gagged at the scent. That was when the knowing began. She bought a test at the pharmacy down the street, tucked it into her purse like a secret, and waited until twilight to take it. She didn't even take off her coat. She just stood in the bathroom of her tiny apartment, watching 2 pink lines bloom like a truth she hadn't asked for. Pregnant. Clara sank to the tiled floor, knees pulled to her chest. She wasn't crying. Not exactly. It was more like the air had thickened and she couldn't breathe through it fast enough. She placed her palm on her abdomen, still flat, still silent, but no longer just hers. A child. His child. She didn't tell Julian. Not yet. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't yet trust what this meant for them. The story broke on a Tuesday. Clara was halfway through a reading lesson when her phone buzzed in the desk drawer. Once, then again, then a flood. She ignored it at first, but during lunch, when she finally checked, her hands went cold. Mystery woman spotted with Julian Mercer, multiple overnight visits. A blurry photo, her walking out of his building, a scarf over her head. The caption, "Public school teacher or tech billionaire's hidden affair?" She couldn't breathe. In the hours that followed, her name, once ordinary, invisible, began to trend online. A Reddit thread, a Twitter storm, Facebook groups with her face photoshopped beside Julian's. Some called her a gold digger. Others claimed she'd trapped him. A few even speculated the pregnancy. She hadn't told anyone, not even her closest friend. But the rumor had taken on a life of its own, fed by assumptions and headlines. By the end of the day, her school principal called her into the office. He didn't meet her eyes. "We've been advised to place you on administrative leave until the situation settles." Clara didn't argue. She nodded, packed her things, and left the building through the back door. That night, reporters stood outside her apartment. Cameras flashed through her kitchen window. One drone hovered above her fire escape. She sat in the bathroom, lights off, curled beside the tub, her phone buzzing beside her like a heartbeat she couldn't escape. Julian hadn't called. She told herself he was overwhelmed, that he was buying time, figuring it out. But silence in the face of chaos was its own kind of betrayal. She wanted to scream, to smash the phone, to vanish. But instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry," pressing her palm against her belly, over and over again. Because the worst part wasn't the lies online. It was that somewhere deep inside she had begun to believe them. She didn't leave in rage. She left in quiet heartbreak. The kind that doesn't throw plates or scream in doorways, but folds clothes in silence and forgets to cry until the packing is done. Julian found her in the bedroom, kneeling beside the dresser, folding one of his sweaters, the gray one she used to sleep in when she stayed over. Her hands lingered on the fabric longer than necessary. She didn't look up when he entered. "You don't have to do this," he said. She kept folding. "Clara." She paused, eyes lowered. Then softly, "I've already done it, Julian. I just haven't walked out the door yet." He stepped closer. "Please." Talk to me." She stood slow and finally met his eyes. They weren't angry, which somehow hurt more. They were tired, heavy, like she'd been carrying something alone for far too long. "You should have talked to me first," she said, "before the headlines, before the silence. I was trying to figure out how to fix it." Clara let out a dry, almost laugh. "You can't fix something by pretending it's not broken." He moved closer. "I was protecting you." "No," she said, her voice sharper now, pain rising through it. "You were protecting the image of yourself you've spent years curating. The controlled, untouchable Julian Mercer, the one who never falters, the one who disappears when things get messy." "That's not fair, isn't it?" Her voice trembled. "You left me out there alone, pregnant, hunted by cameras, shamed online. And you stayed silent." He opened his mouth, but she shook her head. "I wasn't asking for a press release, Julian. I was asking for a phone call, a hand to hold, something to tell me I wasn't just collateral damage in your empire." Julian reached for her hand, gripping it tight, almost desperate. "I never saw you that way. Then why did I feel disposable?" The silence that followed was louder than any shouting match could have been. She pulled her hand away, gently but firmly, walked past him into the hallway. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now echoed with everything they weren't saying. At the front door, she paused to zip her coat, voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Julian." His breath caught. She looked at him one last time. "But I won't stay with someone who only loves me when no one's watching." He blinked like he hadn't expected her to say it out loud, like hearing it made it real. She opened the door. Julian's voice cracked. "Clara, please, I don't want to lose you." She stood in the doorway for a long beat. Her hand trembled on the knob. "You already have," she whispered, and this time she didn't look back. The door closed with the softest click, the kind that didn't slam, but shattered everything anyway. He didn't move for a long time. He stood in the hallway, staring at the space she used to fill. The coat hook she always used, the mug she left by the sink, the pillow still holding the shape of her sleep. His body felt too large for the room, too heavy for his own skin. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. No reporters this time. Just rain. Just gray. Just the sound of his own breath, uneven and raw. And then, a sudden ache in his chest. Regret, real and sharp, like a hand closing around his ribs. He sat on the floor, not because he meant to, but because his knees gave out. Everything he'd built, everything he had protected, meant nothing in that moment. Power had never cost him anything before. But now, it had cost him her, and the child she carried, and the version of himself he might have become if he had just dared to choose love, out loud. Julian sat in the dark long after she left, the only light coming from the fractured glow of the street lamp outside. The apartment was too quiet, too still. Every sound he had grown used to, every small comfort, had left with her. The tea kettle was untouched. The throw blanket still draped across the back of the couch held the faintest trace of her perfume. But none of it mattered now. None of it filled the space she once occupied, the silence she had left behind. For the first time in his carefully constructed life, Julian Mercer didn't know what to do. He had stood at the top of boardrooms. He had spoken at global tech summits with the ease of someone born for control. He had watched stock prices soar and fall with the kind of emotional detachment that made him seem inhuman. But love, real love, had undone him in ways no market ever could. And now Clara was gone, with his child growing quietly inside her. He kept seeing her face, the way her voice broke when she said, "You already left me," the way she wouldn't meet his eyes when she zipped her coat, the way her fingers slipped out of his like rain through an open hand. His empire, once a fortress, felt like a gilded cage now. He had spent years building walls so no one could hurt him. But in the end, those same walls had kept her out. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he wandered the rooms like a ghost, touching the edges of her absence. He sat at the piano she once teased him for never playing. He opened the fridge and stared at the untouched groceries she bought. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Tired, hollow, aching. And in the cold, gray silence of morning, something cracked inside him. For once, he didn't call his assistant. He didn't check his calendar. He didn't reply to the board's emails demanding clarification, damage control, or strategy. Instead, he opened a blank document and wrote 3 sentences. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO. I no longer wish to lead from a place of fear. I choose love. It wasn't a grand statement. It wasn't polished, but it was real. By noon, the message had gone viral. By 2, the stock dipped. By 5, headlines screamed, "Mercer resigns, legacy or love?" But Julian didn't read them. He was already driving. Not in a black car with tinted windows, not with security detail or a camera crew, but alone, windows down, wind in his face, heart in his throat. He drove past the edge of the city, past the river she loved, past the bookstore where they first smiled at each other. He remembered the cabin, the tea, the cello music, the way she leaned into his shoulder like home. He remembered her whisper, "I'm still here." And now it was his turn to say it. When he reached her apartment, there were no words rehearsed, no speech, just his breath and a knock. She opened the door slowly, eyes cautious, heart guarded. He didn't beg. He didn't apologize with noise. He simply looked at her and said, "I left the world they built for me because I want to build something else, with you." And for the first time since she walked away, she didn't look like she was about to run. She looked like she was starting to believe him. It didn't begin with a kiss, nor with a sweeping promise. It began with silence. The kind of silence that sits between 2 people who have once loved deeply, once lost everything, and now find themselves back in the same room, unsure of what still remains. When Julian stood at her door, he wasn't holding flowers. He didn't carry apology speeches or neatly packaged regrets. He only had one sentence. "I left the world they built for me because I want to build something else, with you." Clara didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't reach for him. She simply looked at him, long and quietly, then opened the door. Not because she had forgiven him, but because she was willing to listen. And for Julian, that was already a kind of miracle. He didn't step in like a hero returning from war. He stepped in like a man unsure whether he still belonged. Sitting at the edge of her worn-out couch, hands clasped tightly, his eyes wandered to the familiar pile of books in the corner. Books she once built into a fortress around her heart. Clara moved through the kitchen, brewing tea in slow, deliberate gestures, like the silence between them was something fragile that might break if touched too harshly. When she handed him a cup, their fingers didn't brush, but in the space between them, something softer than forgiveness began to stir. Julian didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to buy her comfort or offer solutions. He just returned, day after day, quietly, patiently. He brought groceries, a pack of chamomile tea, a scarf she once liked but never bought. He never assumed, always asked, and never pushed. He didn't arrive as the man the world had named a tech giant, but as the man she once met between poetry aisles in a bookstore, who couldn't quite understand what he was reading, but loved that she did. Slowly, piece by piece, she let him in again. She let him feel the baby kick. Let him sit beside her in the waiting room during her checkups. Let him laugh over baby names that sounded more like weather reports than human beings. They rebuilt something, not from declarations or grand acts, but from the smallest choices. The way he remembered to put the honey on the left side of the cabinet because she hated reaching. The way she placed her feet in his lap at night and read aloud even when he had already fallen asleep. The way they fought over how to fold onesies, then laughed and started over. One morning, with soft light crawling across the floorboards, Clara stood at the window, hands gently cradling her belly. Julian wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his lips against her neck. She tilted her head toward him, half smiling. "No suits today?" He chuckled into her shoulder. "I've resigned from them, and I'm not going back." She turned slowly, placing one hand on her stomach, the other on his cheek. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," he said honestly. She kissed him then, slow and deep, not as an act of forgiveness, but recognition. of everything they had been through, of the wounds they chose not to run from, of the love they had decided to meet again. Weeks later, they moved into a small farmhouse outside the city. No paparazzi, no headlines, just trees and wind and a nursery painted together while old records played softly in the background. Their son Eli was born on a rainy Thursday morning. Julian held him with both hands, trembling from the weight of something so small, yet infinite. Clara looked at him and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." And Julian, with tears in his eyes, simply replied, "None of us are." Time passed. They didn't live a perfect life. They argued about laundry, lost sleep over late-night crying, and forgot grocery lists more times than they could count. But this time, no one walked away. No one shut down. They stayed. They sat together on the hard days, and they repeated one phrase like a vow: "We choose each other, no matter what." And then one golden afternoon beneath the pear tree in their backyard, with bare feet on soft grass and the sky wide open above them, they got married. No white dress, no curated guest list. She wore a linen dress. He wore a shirt she once said made him look a little less terrifying. There were no speeches, no vows on microphones, no press in sight, just a quiet promise, shared between two people who had learned the cost of silence and the miracle of staying. We will choose each other, even on the hard days, even when the world forgets us, even when walking away would be easier. And that, at last, was what home was meant to be. It had been almost a year. The seasons had shifted, spring into summer, summer into fall, and now winter had begun to lose its grip again. The trees outside their farmhouse stood bare, their branches thin and reaching toward the sky like soft, tired arms. But beneath the ground, something new was already growing. Inside the house, warmth hummed quietly. The fire crackled in the hearth, and Eli, now 9 months old, babbled to himself while crawling clumsily on the rug. Julian sat cross-legged nearby, eyes tracking his son like a quiet guardian, hands never far from reaching out. Clara stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, the smell of cinnamon and baked apples filling the air. Her hair was messy, tied up high and loose, and a streak of flour dusted one cheek. She hummed to herself, not realizing she was doing it, a quiet, happy sound that Julian never dared interrupt. This was their life now, not perfect, but real. They had traded noise for quiet, power for peace, headlines for home. Outside the spotlight, time moved differently. They no longer rushed, no longer planned their days in tight bullet points. Mornings began with sleepy smiles. Evenings ended with stories whispered over tea. There were still hard moments. Sleepless nights, old fears, the occasional flare of doubt. But those moments no longer had the power to break them. They had weathered too much to fall apart now. Julian had become someone else. Not in the way people change completely, but in the way someone returns to who they were always meant to be. He had found a rhythm in simplicity, chopping wood, building shelves, learning to make pancakes without burning them. He still read the news, still answered old colleagues from time to time, but ambition no longer kept him up at night. Love did, and that, he had learned, was the better reason to lose sleep. Clara had grown too. She taught again, part-time, at a community center in town. Her students adored her, not for her credentials, but for her presence, for the way she listened, for the way she told stories. And sometimes on rainy afternoons, she wrote, not for anyone else, just for herself. Pages tucked into drawers, little beginnings, quiet truths. One evening, as the last snow melted outside, Julian found her in the nursery. Eli had just fallen asleep, his tiny hand curled around the edge of the crib. Clara stood by the window, watching the moon rise through the trees. He came up behind her, slid his arms around her waist. She leaned into him, back against his chest, eyes still on the moonlight. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked. "About what? If we hadn't made it through? If you hadn't come back?" He rested his chin on her shoulder. "I do, sometimes." "And?" Julian took a breath. "Then I look at this, at you, at him, at all of it, and I stop thinking about what could have been. Because this This is more than I ever thought I'd get. Clara smiled, small and soft. It still scares me sometimes. How fragile it all was. That's what makes it beautiful. They stood there quiet for a while, breathing in sync, hearts no longer guarded. And then Clara said something she hadn't voiced out loud before. I think I want another child someday. Julian pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes widened, surprised, but not shocked. More like deeply moved. Really? She nodded. Not now. Maybe not even soon. But someday. I just want more of this. More of us. Julian pressed his forehead to hers. Then we'll keep building. And they did. The story didn't end there. It never really does. Because love, real love, isn't a chapter with a neat conclusion. It's a garden you keep tending, a house you keep repairing, a fire you keep feeding. It changes shape. It stretches. It breaks and mends. But if you keep choosing it, if you keep showing up, it keeps growing. Outside, the first crocus bloomed beneath the snow, and inside, life, imperfect and honest, went on. Not loud, not flawless, but full, together.